Welcome to Traces of Trauma, where we explore the quiet echoes that trauma leaves behind and the gentle path of healing. I'm your host, Brian Arbor, inviting you to join me in conversations that honor our stories, our struggles, and the strength and grace it takes to move forward. This is a safe space to listen, reflect, and connect in the shared journey beyond our trauma. I'm here today with Jenny Ferguson. She's a new friend. We've probably known each other for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And we were talking about just the logistics of this was meant to be a logistics call. And then we just started chatting. I was like, damn, I wish this was on the record. So we're just diving right in. Jenny, thanks for being here. I know just a little bit about your background. And the first thing you expressed was, gosh, I don't know if I'm the right fit for your audience. So, will you just say a little bit about like, huh? Why? Like, why is that a concern? Where are you coming from?
Hi Brian. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And my concern over being a right fit for the audience comes from my history of branding as a career. So I've been a graphic designer and a brand strategist for 22 years this year. And so I work a lot with clients on making sure that their content and their aesthetic and their general presentation lines up with who they really want to speak to. And so I double check to see if I match your target audience because that's something that I ask my clients and that I do a lot for myself.
Uh-huh. And I had to chuckle because I'm over here like, of course you're the right fit for my audience because I've published one episode at this point, which was basically an introduction. And I've had two other recordings that are in the works to get edited. So, what audience? But also, like, I asked you to be here. So, why are you worried about whether you're the right fit? And
Oh
it's
my
so
gosh.
familiar.
The I mean it's called traces of trauma and that is a trace of trauma in my life. That's that little bit of imposter syndrome peeking out and saying, "Oh, are you sure? Like, really?"
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Yeah, and we just so easily fell into conversation. And so we decided to hop on for a quick recording session here. You were just sharing with me about having, do you want to say a little bit about like your background, kind of like how you find yourself dealing with the lingering effects of trauma and like kind of what you're up to at this point in that process?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier to Brian that I am 34 years old, and 32 of those 34 years have been spent in some sort of abusive situation or relationship. It started when I was an infant, and that level of trauma, especially in your early child development years, alters your brain chemistry and it alters the way you perceive the world.
Yeah.
It literally stunts part of your development and overgrows other parts of it. So my traces of trauma tend to color my entire worldview. And I recently got out of a narcissistic marriage, thank goodness. And I have spent the last year and a half looking at myself and trying to decide what exactly it is that I want to do. Because before, it was always about what he wanted to do and what our goals are. I'm going to do air quotes there. What our goals are, because when I would think about the way my future was supposed to be set up, I had a plan. I had a plan in place from the time I was in elementary school. I knew exactly how I wanted my life to progress. It was very documented and compartmentalized, and all of the people in my life fit into very specific boxes.
Yeah.
And as an adult, those boxes kind of broke down. It was like they all got wet all of a sudden, and they're all cardboard, and then they just started crumbling. And those I very distinctly remember whenever I actually got married that the people who were in my wedding party were from different stages of my life. They were from the 2 different colleges that I went to, they were from high school, they were from family, they were from all of these different places and different people groups and different social circles that I was part of that had never really touched before. And it was a very weird experience for me. It felt kind of itchy, but like an itch of the soul instead of a physical itch.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately, that was the narcissistic marriage that I got into, but that beginning of it was a really great step for me as far as breaking into the trauma cesspool that I had covered up and draining it
Mm,
and really getting deep into parts of me that I had tried to push down for so long. And again, it was just a very weird feeling. Like it was like introducing your parents to, oh gosh, your boss.
yeah.
Like it was that kind of disconnect.
And it
And
sounds like it was not intentional, that
no, it
all
was
of
not.
those circles collided with each other and all the lines got blurry and all the compartmentalizing started fracturing apart.
Yes. It was nuts, and I didn't actually know until much later that compartmentalization is a hallmark of PTSD. I had no idea,
Yeah.
and I was diagnosed with PTSD a couple of years after marrying, and we were together for 10 and a half years. I got married when I was 21, and so 2 weeks fresh out of graduating from my four-year university, I got married. And unfortunately, 5 months before I got married, my dad had shot and killed himself.
Mm,
And another very good friend of mine was killed in a head-on car collision.
yeah.
And I graduated college. I got done with my education. I moved out of my parents' household. I moved out of that, like, safety net into my married household. I never had a transitional experience of a dorm room or a house that I lived in on my own.
Yeah.
I went straight from the safety net of childhood into married life.
Yes.
And during that time, I developed major chronic depression.
Yeah.
And it I basically graduated from college and then my brain just shut down for 6 months. And I can remember sitting in a recliner and staring at the white wall. It wasn't even interesting. Like, there was no TV on it, there was no paintings on it. It was a white wall with a window set high up in it. But I would just stare at that wall and dissociate the entire time.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I would pull out my crochet project and I would make a flower or two, something tiny. I struggled with basic tasks like feeding myself, let alone feeding my husband. Now I was a wife and I was expected to step into the traditional gender roles in a marriage. So I was at home, he was working, and I was home because I was depressed. And I had a job, but that was going 2 days a week. to be a secretary for a summer camp. And then 5 days a week, I don't remember what I did.
Yeah.
It's blank. After that, I started getting better. I was seeing a therapist at the time and started kind of coming out of that. Uh, oh my gosh, it was very emotionally intense. And I remember getting my first job. Like, it felt like my first real job, but it totally wasn't. I've been working since I was, I don't know, 12.
Yeah.
Like, I grew up a farm kid. You're always working. And I got my first real job, and the idea that I could be self-sufficient, having never had that before, because again, I went straight from home and safety with my parents and my grandma into married life with a husband who was working and making income. And suddenly I had a job and it was actually paying me. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I can contribute to myself. I can be independent, which was both the greatest and the worst thing to happen to me because I could be independent, but I shouldn't have been. So I worked for a while. I actually worked over in Clayton, um, Missouri at the same time that the Ferguson riots started. And we were one metro stop away from where that final court decision came down for the major case in Ferguson. And I remember my boss sitting us all down and saying, "Hey, here is what we're going to do. They are going to postpone releasing the decision as long as possible during the day because it was a very cold day, and they were hoping that the longer they postponed it, the more people would go home. So there would be less rioting and looting for people who were disgruntled with the decision." And then she told us, "Now, what I want you to do is they shut down the Metro link between the courthouse location and our location. We were right in front of a Metro link stop. They shut down the Metro link. And if you see people coming out of the Metro link because they would run through the tunnels, if you see people coming out of the Metro link, I want you to grab your computer, unplug it, and head to the basement." Because they were going to break the windows, they were going to come in, they were going to loot, they were going to riot. That's what we were told to do. And that was terrifying. And my shift ended before they actually came down with the decision. I was out of the city by the time the decision came through, thank goodness. And any sense of safety I had felt from that job, this independence, suddenly was terrifying.
Hmm.
And I wasn't at that job for a long time. It was only about 7 months, something like that. I found something a little bit closer, and so I started going to that job, but that job, oh my gosh, the big boss, it was a family operation. The big boss was fucking terrifying. It was nuts. And he would get upset and he would yell. And that hit every single trauma hiding instinct inside my little body. I say little body. We are every version that we have ever been, all kind of stacked on top of each other. Like, what are those nesting Russian dolls? The matryoshka? Something along those lines. And so the little girl still inside of me heard that yelling and went, "We must pacify, we must hide, we must wait for the anger to blow over." But I couldn't because I was there for work and I had a job to do. And unfortunately, that job took me by his desk a lot. Thankfully, He never yelled at me, but pretty much everybody else was fair game. And so, of course, I did not last a long time in that job. That job was 10 whole months. And so I was in that environment for most of a year. And when I finally told them, hey, I have found another position and I'm giving you 1 week's notice, they basically were like, oh my gosh, the betrayal. And the idea that anybody could want to leave and do something else. Oh my gosh, that last week was hell. And so I got out of that job and I was like, oh, well, like I'm pretty entrepreneurial. I've had my own t-shirt business since I was 15 years old. I can do that. So I did that for a little while, about 6 months. And then I got I had given my resume to like 2 years prior. They kept a hold of my resume. And so I got a call and he was like, hey, we're filling an open position. And it looks like you qualify for it. Are you available for an interview? And I was like, well, yeah, I suppose I am. I've got my own side business that's part-time, so I'd be looking for something part-time. This was the first time I had ever negotiated anything in my life.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that I could actually have that conversation with people. And so that learning experience, the power rush, the feeling of control over part of your life that you just not had before was very intense.
Yeah.
So I ended up stepping into that role, and I was in that role for 5 years. And it was a great fit for me. It was a great fit for the company. And then I started having medical issues. Turns out all of those years of trauma and abuse, keep in mind, I'm still married to a narcissistic husband throughout all of these experiences. All of that external garbage built up in my body until I literally could not take it anymore. I had a point in 2019 where I stopped eating. I stopped drinking water. I stopped caring. I fell into the apathy that is the hallmark of depression. Not sadness, but a complete emptiness. And about 4 days of that, I was at my therapist's office and she said, I'm not comfortable with the things that you're talking about right now. I'm going to have to call your emergency contact. And I looked at her and I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, that's a change. And PTSD, turns out I also have ADHD and all of the alphabet soup of many things. And any sort of change is just very jarring. And so I said, well, what does that mean for me? And she said, so your emergency contact is going to come here and they're going to take you to the hospital. And for me, like, oh, well, hospitals are for like physically sick and dying people, and I am neither of those.
Yeah, it wasn't that kind of hospital. You were neither of those things.
Yeah. So here's the thing, you have to go to that kind of hospital in order to get to the other hospital.
Ah.
Yeah. So here I am. We go to the emergency room to Mercy Hospital in St. Louis. And any emergency room in St. Louis is packed full of people. At that time, it was 2019. COVID was just beginning to leak into the US, but they didn't know what it was yet. People were having really bad colds and just really bad symptoms. But nobody had really identified it as COVID yet. And this was early in 2019. So I sat in the waiting room of the ER. I could not actually walk into the ER under my own power. My body had physically weakened enough, which it tends to do if you don't eat or drink or take care of yourself. I had to be pushed in a wheelchair. And then the experience of going through all of the checks and all of the questions, it felt so very invasive. They asked me questions about, do I have thoughts of harming myself or others? I had had insomnia, really bad insomnia, for about 3 months at that point. That was the first sign of my body breaking that led to this big event. And I had gotten 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night for 3 months. Like, it's no wonder new parents need a break. Seriously. I had gotten very minimal sleep. And then they were asking me, "Have you had thoughts of killing yourself or others?" And I'm like, "No, but a medical coma sounds really nice right about now. Like, I could use a good solid nap." And, of course, they don't like that answer. So, they basically had to keep me in a locked room. It was a glorified prison cell. The room was locked. The bathroom was behind one of those metal shuttered doors that comes down from the top, rolls down. The only thing in that room was the bed and a chair and a little rolling table. The bed was bolted down. You couldn't move it at all. The chair was solid plastic, I think. Like something like you couldn't break it. At least I couldn't under my current strength. There was nothing in there that I could hurt myself with, but there was also nothing in there that I could help myself with. And that was a very big thing. They go through a physical examination whenever you go into the hospital with that kind of an issue. They take away everything on your person that can be used to hurt yourself. And they put you in paper clothing. I had no comfort items, nothing familiar. And at the time, my husband, who was my primary caretaker, had to leave because they had limited visiting hours, regardless of marital status. I was alone in this room overnight. And then the following morning, I was transferred to the psych ward. Again, I was in paper clothing. I didn't even have underwear on. They took that. We got to the psych ward, and they had called my husband and told him where I was going to be. And he brought me some clothes from home. He brought me a few things from home that they had gone through and checked and basically disassembled for anything that could be used to hurt myself or others. And by disassembled, I mean they took the strings out of my hoodies. They took the staples out of a magazine that he had brought me. They dismantled any sort of device, basically, that I could use in any sort of detrimental way. Because I couldn't walk into the hospital under my own power, I had been using a cane. They took my cane away from me. They gave me a very heavy hospital walker. And walking around with that was a full body workout for my body at that time. It was exhausting. And I can honestly say I spent 4 days in the psych ward. So 1 day overnight in the ER, in a locked cell, basically, and 4 days in the psych ward. And it, to date, is quite possibly the worst experience of my life.
Yeah.
They are just there to keep you alive and breathing. They are not there to nurture. They are not there to comfort. They are there to make sure that you don't hurt yourself, that you don't kill yourself. When I got out of there, I was broken. I felt like I had been basically kidnapped and locked up. That's
Yeah.
what they did. I was fragile and in pieces.
And you went home to a narcissist.
And I went home to a narcissist
Yeah.
who was really focused on when could I get back on my feet so that his life could be normal again. The following month after that experience, I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic connective tissue disorder. It basically means every bit of connective tissue in my body is extra stretchy. So that's all of my ligaments and tendons, my skin. Most of your organs are made up of connective tissue, your brain. It's all a little extra stretchy and it moves further than it should. But the kicker is that the extra stretch doesn't have the same strength. It's like an old rubber band. Whenever you start pulling it apart and stretching, and it just starts like pinging and like disconnecting in a few spots. So I had been causing micro trauma to all of my joints for my entire life because I had no idea that I had this genetic condition. I was in pain. I did not take the diagnosis well. I was already broken in pieces. And they said, hey, here is something that is genetic and literally there is no cure. You will never get past this.
Yeah.
Brian, I was 28. 28 years old and diagnosed with essentially a failure of the body. And since then, I stayed at that job for an additional 2 years. And then I started out on my own. I decided I wanted to run my own business, but I also couldn't work full time. Since I broke in the psych ward, I have not been able to work more than 20 hours a week any given week since. In 2022, I had an emergency hysterectomy. I ended up in the ER with period pain that was so bad, they gave me morphine. And I will say, I had never had morphine before that moment. They only gave me half of what was in one tube, and I went, oh my gosh, this is the greatest feeling ever. This is like instant relief that made me feel so high, even though I wasn't. It was just complete relief from the pain. I looked at that nurse and I said, I love you. We're best friends now. And she's like, okay, that's the amount that I'm going to give you.
Mhm.
And they told me in the ER that I needed to get a hysterectomy before my next period hit. So I had a limited window of 3 weeks to call my doctor, schedule for the pre-op, and schedule for the hysterectomy. So we got it all done. I had a hysterectomy, which of course is major surgery. They removed 3 organs and sewed me back up on the inside, and they something that is a common comorbidity with EDS is a really high tolerance to pain medication. That also means that pain medication wears off faster.
Yes.
And they didn't necessarily account for that in the operating procedure. So I woke up in their recovery room. The only thing I could say was, it hurts. It hurts. They gave me some pain meds. That started to kick in. It was better. They wheeled me back to my room. 3 hours later, those pain meds started to wear off, and I was fully, like, cognizant and coherent at that time. I could feel it's kind of starting, and I turned and I told the nurse, I said, "Hey, feels like the pain meds are starting to wear off. I'm sure you wanted to know whenever this happened, but we're gonna need something fairly quickly." And of course, anytime you tell any sort of a medical professional anything about pain meds, they're immediately like, "Oh, must be drug seeking or possibly like something touchy is going on here." She was very sweet about it. She had called and they had to talk to a lot of people in order to get pain medication approved. Unfortunately, while they were doing that, the pain medication completely wore off. And I had been cut open on the inside. And so I remember holding my stomach with one hand, clutching the bed, the hospital bed with the other hand, and screaming. That was the only thing I was capable of doing. That lasted for a solid 20 minutes before they were able to get pain medication finally approved and into my body in order to calm it down again. I was on narcotics, of course, as you are after major surgery like that. And narcotics tend to make you nauseous and kind of dizzy. So post-surgery, I wasn't really eating a whole lot. 1 week post-surgery, I was feeling better. I was actually starting to get up and like walk around a little bit. I could get myself to the bathroom. I could walk myself out to the kitchen very slowly. And my husband had a scheduled work trip to New York City at the time. So it was something that he couldn't get out of. So he left me with my mom, or rather, my mom came to the house to take care of me. He left on a work trip and he came back a week later. 2 days after that, I got full blown COVID. And I was running a 102.9-degree fever for 3 days. I checked my temperature every 20 to 30 minutes because as soon as it ticked over to 103, that's brain damage territory. So we need to head to the ER. I was recovering from surgery. This is 2 weeks post-op. And then COVID affects the lungs. I started coughing. And coughing when your gut has been cut open is very painful.
Yeah.
It's a traumatizing level of pain. And I had COVID for 3 weeks. It took a very long time to get past the initial phase of that.
Mm.
A week or two after that, I ended up passing a tapeworm that the lack of food and the narcotics combination had killed. I was freaking out. We packed up and headed to an urgent care, and I handed them a little Ziploc baggie, and I was like, "I need you to tell me what, like, to do something with this." So they gave me an antiparasitic arsenic pill, essentially. And of course, there was a slurry of tests after that. And the after having that tapeworm, I developed a pretty bad nut allergy. And I noticed I didn't feel right after eating. Sometimes my gut would bloat horribly. I would look like I was 6 months pregnant and feel like I had a balloon with needles on it inside of me. And then I went to we were at a Sam's Club, I think, and they had a test, a take-home test where you could do little blood drops on it to check for food sensitivities. We had suspected it had been something like that for a while. So I did that test and it came back with 11 different food sensitivities. I'm like, oh, wheat is on this list, so I can't have bread. Soy is on this list. Chicken is on this list. Eggs are on this list. Both the egg whites and the egg yolks. Cow's milk is on this list. Well, that's everything that I had grown up eating, basically. That's all the recipes I knew how to cook. So at that point, I just stopped cooking. And the shame I felt as a wife who was completely dependent on her husband to provide and to care for. And I was not able to reciprocate was so intense. I fell into depression again. And living with a narcissist, a covert narcissist. The people around us didn't know what was going on because he hid it very well. But he would say things to me that were directed at getting a specific result he wanted, regardless of how hurtful it was. There were some times where he thought, well, I just shouldn't be lying in bed anymore because that was what was making me feel bad. And so he thought that I should get up and move around. And of course, I didn't have the energy for it. There were so many reasons why I just couldn't or wouldn't get up. And so in his mind, he was like, okay, well, she can't or likely won't do this for herself, so I have to do it for her. So he would physically pick me up and move me where he wanted me to be, where he thought would be better for me. I had no autonomy, no personal boundaries, no physical space. It was during that time frame that he raped me. It was also during that time frame that he told me that the symptoms I was experiencing for various medical conditions had hurt his feelings and that I needed to apologize to him for that. And at that point, I just thought, oh my God, your problems are so small. I'm looking at life and death, and you're looking at, well, this hurt my feelings. And I think that you need to apologize to me for something that you have no control over. There's, of course, more to the story.
Yeah.
As far as the traces of trauma goes, coming out of that, pulling myself out, like I mentioned earlier, I left him a year and a half ago. And I didn't know who I was as a person. I had spent my entire childhood in very abusive situations. There was verbal abuse, there was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse. There to into a marriage to this person who was so focused on his own happiness that he destroyed my sense of identity. And now suddenly I was on my own and I had to figure that out. Figure out what I wanted to do. That was very difficult for me. Every day I would sit and think, what do I want in life? But that question was too big.
Yeah.
When I started looking at the smaller things, such as what brings me a glimmer of happiness right now, then I started to get better. I particularly enjoy my first sip of coffee first thing in the morning. I make a whole big deal out of it. I started doing a little ritual of I would get up and I would go to the fridge and I would pull my coffee creamer out, close the fridge door, focusing on every motion of making this cup of coffee. go to my cup, I would pull out my favorite mug, which of course I'm drinking from today, and it says, "You're doing great" on it. I would put my creamer, a little bit of creamer in the bottom of the cup, and then I would pull the coffee pot out and I would swirl coffee around in it, very barista style without ever having barista experience. But I was here to make a purposeful and intentional pause in that moment. And then that first sip of coffee and the warmth in my mouth and feeling it travel down my throat and settling in my stomach just made me draw my shoulders up and a smile across my face. And I would just say, I could breathe in that moment. Those moments are what I started looking for.
Those moments are worth getting out of bed for.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And I'm still recovering and still growing and still learning. But in the meantime, trauma sucks. And it's okay to say that out loud. It's okay to say, ugh, this is awful. Earlier today, I had a very emotional day and I basically took my mask off and I looked at my mom and I said, hey, here's what's actually going on in my brain. And I gave her the unfiltered, raw, very intense emotional side of things. She's been trying to get me to remove my mask for a while. And so I finally did it. And I don't think she was quite prepared for that level,
Yeah.
but she handled it very well. And I also communicated to her that I'm going to talk about a lot of problems that are on my mind, but I don't want you to come in and fix those problems. I just want you to listen. And if I want you to solve something for me, I will tell you.
Yes.
But until that time, I just want you to listen. And so I told her that, prefaced the conversation with that, and she listened. And it's been very difficult for me to express what I need in those moments where I just needed her to listen and to directly say that as a very non confrontational, like built in trauma response. Like, it's really hard for me to say those types of things to people.
Yeah.
This is what I need in this moment. Can you do it? Because if you can't, then you are not the person I'm going to take off the mask for.
Yeah.
I'm not going to just dump it on you, anyways.
Yeah.
If you think you can handle it, that's great. Here we go. Buckle up.
Yeah. I translate that over on my end. Like if I'm gonna spill my guts, I
Mm.
need you to not rearrange them.
Oh
I don't
my.
need someone to rearrange my guts.
Yeah.
If you can keep your hands off, I'll let you see it all.
Yeah. I absolutely love that analogy. It's very visceral and attention grabbing. And that is such a huge part of your story. So I mentioned at the beginning that I am a brand strategist, and part of what I do is help people tell their stories. And I can do this now because I have one hell of a story. That was like a third of it, maybe.
Yeah.
And I look for what makes people unique and different and what brings them joy. And I say, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible. Look at how beautiful you are." Yeah, you might have broken pieces that you've kind of reassembled, but look at the gold shining through those cracks. Nobody else has this.
Yeah.
And
And
you are
thank you for
so,
being that partner for me. It
absolutely.
was our connection and your focus on branding who you are rather than branding your business like it's some separate thing.
Yeah,
Um, and that fundamentally shifted the way I relate to myself and the way I am learning to offer myself to the world.
yeah,
So I wound up creating this podcast from who I am rather than from what I wanted to offer that I thought would be well received
yeah,
or I avoided, and thank goodness, building some persona that was going to distinguish this from something else.
right?
Right? This is just me.
You took your mask off,
Yeah.
and I'm so incredibly proud of you for that. It's such a brave decision and such a brave move and incredibly scary to do. But it's one of those situations where they say courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the will to act in spite of the fear. Essentially, be scared and do it anyways.
Yeah. And there were so many moments in what you were sharing that I wanted to just pause and underline something. But I also didn't want to interrupt
Yeah,
the flow of just like letting it out, whatever you wanted to express. There are so many ways that what you shared here points to the interconnectedness and how one trauma bleeds into or crosses over into the next one. And they, like, the traumas intertwine and then become this untangleable ball of mess
yeah,
that we have to somehow think through and navigate through and relate to other people through while
mm,
we figure out who we are and what we need to keep going, and then sacrifice all of those needs to keep contributing to other people and somehow try to find those glimmers that make getting up every day possible,
yeah,
let alone desirable eventually. We connected over that space of apathy, which is
mhm,
what had us jump into this conversation like, oh, we should be recording this right now. The sense of the inevitable, inescapable nature
yeah.
of that trauma that has taken root in us. Um, and I want to cycle back to trauma sucks.
Oh my gosh, it does.
And it is okay to say
Mhm,
that. And along with that, there's the danger of thinking that who you are sucks,
mm.
that like
Trauma
who you
sucks,
are
but you
is
don't.
diminished or tainted or poisoned by that trauma.
Mhm,
And while we are impacted and altered by our trauma, physically, emotionally, like mentally, And our relationships are altered by our trauma, the existing ones and the ones in the past, like our recollection of our lives,
Yeah.
can shift, and our plans, like our ability to envision a future.
Hmm.
There's more to a human being than the trauma that's taken root in them.
Mm.
There is more to you than the trauma that has taken root in you.
Yeah.
And you're not the one. I'm not the one. Listener, you are not the one who planted those seeds in yourself. And you didn't get a say in how they would grow or what shape they would take. You know, one person's trauma is another person's Tuesday.
Yeah.
You don't get to say, like, what hits your nervous system when you're 2 years old, or when you're a teenager, or when you're in your 30s, or in your 60s or 70s. What we can do is take a look. Huh, was that was that trauma talking? Was that like trauma influencing that decision? Would I do something different if I recognized the influence of trauma in this moment? And maybe not. Maybe the presence of trauma and the way it shapes our decisions creates safety, creates a nervous system that's attuned to avoiding, preventing, or uh, dealing with should that thing arise again.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Absolutely. It
And sometimes it has a
absolutely is.
cost, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Brian, this has been such an incredible conversation and storytelling time with you. I really appreciate you for having me on your podcast. And if you don't mind, I would just like to kind of wrap up my portion and speak
Totally.
directly to your listeners for just a moment.
Yeah.
So, for the people who are listening to this podcast, from the bottom of my heart, I want you to know you're so beautiful. And I'm not talking about the physical, I'm talking about the emotional. I'm talking about deep in your heart, where your inner child resides, where all of those glimmers you feel hit the deepest. You may feel broken and bruised and wounded and angry at the world for doing this to you, and you have every right to feel that. But from one wounded soul to another, I see you, and it's beautiful.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.